Now, if that pouring money into circulation was really affecting us at all right now, it could only affect us by increasing taxes. Now, we haven't had tax increases since Ronald Reagan lowered federal taxes and then raised them back up again. We haven't been servicing this debt since the early 1980s. It's not hurting us now. Yes, it will hurt us to monumental extents if we ever service it. But we're not going to do that because it isn't right, because it isn't a debt to the banking system, because it's terminal, because it ruins everything that we've ever fought for and lived for. And we should only have to live for these things instead of fighting for them. It's because of these criminals that fighting ever has to occur. But our battle is a serious one. This is a critical juncture in history. Either we wake up to this obfuscation of the currency, so that by recognizing it in its details, which are few, there's no lawful consideration, there's no debt to the bank, there's no property at risk, there's no justification of interest. The original promissory obligation was to pay and to retire principal from circulation. Add to that one thing, beyond that obvious need to eradicate interest, implied by all of that, add one thing, an obligatory schedule of payment at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property, and you've solved all purportedly economic issues. That's simple. That's all we have to get. You know, if we're going to run around and say, oh, we have a Ponzi scheme after that, change the channel, listen to music, sing yourself a death song. You're dying. You're going down. You think things are bad now? You haven't even seen the tip of the iceberg yet, because when all the money disappears, if you stop these governments from spending money into circulation before you fix the system, that's your death warrant. That's it. You're not suffering from them spending this money into circulation. Yes, you should complain about its improprieties, but the principal impropriety, the one that overshadows all else, is the only reason they need to do this is because of the obfuscation of the currency, because it is terminal, because it has reached terminal failure, and so because we've exceeded the creditworthiness of the people to borrow further to maintain a vital circulation. Guess what? The money still has to come from somewhere. And all that they can do to keep this criminal system over us is to spend money into circulation, stupidly hoping for some while that somehow we are going to overcome terminal indebtedness. People are killing themselves all over the world. Their lives are ruined by this. We cry that stock traders jumped out of windows and then 29 stock market crash. That's nothing compared to what's going on every day, everywhere in the world right now. Homeless people in every country of the world. 125,000 children under the age of 12 homeless on the streets of Los Angeles. It's been reported to me, And we're just saying, oh, they shouldn't spend so much money into circulation. We got to balance the federal budget. You can't balance the federal budget until you fix the economic system. This is the whole thing that I've been explaining all my life. And in '75, I'm working out in a weight room in Valdez, Alaska, and the guy next to me is, he's claiming that, that he's crying about taxes, and I explained to him that he was crying about the wrong thing. that he had to cry about the monetary system, because until you fix the monetary system, if you're going to balance the federal budget, you would have to increase taxes perpetually until taxes would have been the cause of our terminal failure, a secondary cause being as they manifest from this multiplication of falsified indebtedness. But you see, understanding that obfuscation of the currency, we don't even owe this money to the banking system, and every time they need to spend money into circulation, what are they doing? The central bank buys federal bonds. It merely creates evidence of our own debts, which are obligations to pay and to retire the principal from circulation. They're falsified to the central banking system, which launders the principal into their possession. Then, as if that was justified, they claim a risk justifies interest, which multiplies federal debt and multiplies federal costs, because you're not just paying the principal out of circulation, you're paying the principal and the interest out of circulation. Now, if you couldn't balance the budget before, what does increasing your costs do but run the budget further beyond balance? This is stupid. Children can be taught to resolve these problems in one day. I guarantee you, I can teach kindergartners how to resolve this problem in one day. I have. 35 years ago, I have. Why can't we learn? Why can't we see? Why are we crying about the wrong things? Why would we rather hear, oh, it's a Ponzi scheme, or it's money out of thin air, or money has to, debt is bad. Money has to be spent into circulation. It has to be a gift. And the same people who even claim that, after it's spent into circulation, then they have it loaned, like Mr. Simon Dixon, who's now borrowing heavily from my ideas, not giving credit to me. He's teaching them to colleges, but still not getting at the issue and avoiding it. So he has something to teach. Why? Because in one lesson, this should be over with. This isn't something that should take a month, a week. A day is a long time. This one program, I haven't spoken for an hour, and I've covered the issues. How do you solve this problem? You count all prior payments of interest instead toward principal. And then you impose an obligatory schedule of payment. Everyone who's going into foreclosure across the world now would be 12 times as far along in their payments under mathematically perfected economy. In general, that's the rule of thumb. 12 times. 12 times more liquid, 12 times further along in their payments. Why? I've given this example. $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan costs us $1,000 a year, or $83.33 a month under mathematically perfected economy. It costs about 12 times that under the present system. So if you've made one payment and you haven't made a payment for 11 months and you're going into foreclosure, you would be up to your required payment schedule under mathematically perfected economy. You wouldn't even be behind at all. If you made 10 years of payments and you missed a year of payments, you would be 120 years ahead on your schedule of payment. You would have overpaid for the house by 20 years under mathematically perfected economy. Instead of going into foreclosure, you would own your home free and clear and never have to make a payment again. If you had further payments, you would subtract the 10 years that you paid from 120 years, which you've paid under mathematically perfected economy, and find you're 110 years ahead on your payments. 110 years. 110 years. You don't even have to resume making a payment for 110 years, and then it might be $10 a month. And do we want to do this? No, geez. That's too much to learn. I'd rather pay $500,000 for the same house and have a $500,000 debt at the end of the period that I've, quote, paid off my debts, unquote. That's what you're saying if this is too much for you, and that's pathetically stupid. Another thing that I wanted to do today was respond to an article. Vincent Byrne sent me a link to this just the other day, and it pertains to Ireland, so many of you may be familiar with it, but I'd like to discuss it in light of solution, effect of one solution. This is from Yahoo News, UK and Ireland. URL's a little complex, so I'll spare you of it. Title of the article is 1.6M households face €100 tax. Press Association, whoever they are. This is important information. I just, it's hard for me to, give you a piece of, my insight without explaining to myself. Explaining myself, that is. I'm not a sour person, but a critical thinker, which is, we have a state in the United States, Missouri. It's called the Show Me State, and there's a state pride of Missouri that, when someone is fibbing or exaggerating the truth, their attitude is to see right through it. But this is a personal behavior that is incumbent upon all of us in any purportedly free society, because freedom is first of all a product of justice. That is, justice prescribes the limits of freedom. I don't have a right to erect a chicken shed 15 feet from my neighbor's bedroom or office and install a rooster that starts crowing at 4 a.m. and he's still busy off until 11 p.m. at night and beyond, waking my neighbor up 3 hours before his usual rising time for normal hours. Or a considerate person wouldn't even do this if the neighbor's working graveyard and the chicken crows, the rooster crows during the day. There's things that we don't do to each other if we're decent people. And if we're decent people, of course, we don't even desire to do that. If you have to have a chicken shed, move it to the side of your property where it won't offend somebody. Or maybe you just can't do that if you can't control your chickens, or build a shed where, they won't sound loudly, and cause such disturbances to people and degradation of their life, And we just don't do these things. So we train our dogs not to bark and so on and so forth. And we keep our yards well so that our neighborhood, is a pleasure for everyone to live in, and instead of just ourselves. These are obligations to each other. So a further obligation, an extension of all these obligations is public consciousness. That is, it's a fact that any crime against one of us is a crime, a potential